There's a restaurant in Paris right now selling 30 grams of fish eggs for half a month's minimum wage. At the exact same moment, dozens of sparrow eggs are sitting in a nest in your backyard, completely free, and nobody has ever thought about boiling one for breakfast. Same biological object, same function, roughly the same nutrition. One is a luxury good, the other is something you'd get side-eyed for even mentioning. The difference was never about the egg itself. It comes down to three things we almost never think about: law, money, and whatever you were fed before you turned 3. And that story is a lot stranger than chicken just tastes better. Start in Hunan, China, during the Ming dynasty. Legend says a farmer forgot a batch of duck eggs in a pit of slaked lime used for building mortar. Weeks later he came back, and the eggs hadn't rotted. They'd transformed into something translucent and amber, the yolk gone greenish-gray, the texture closer to jelly than egg. That's the origin story of the century egg, sometimes called the 1,000-year egg. The name makes people assume it's aged for 100 years. It isn't. The whole process takes weeks to a few months, packing eggs in a mix of clay, ash, salt, and quicklime until the proteins inside completely change structure and color. What's actually interesting here isn't the chemistry, it's that this dish has existed since at least the 1600s, which means hundreds of millions of people grew up treating a color-shifted, ammonia-scented egg as a completely normal appetizer next to congee or cold tofu. Meanwhile, in most Western households, the exact same description, a blackened egg with a strong smell, would get thrown straight in the trash as spoiled food. There's nothing in biology telling you which reaction is correct. Both groups are looking at the same alkaline fermentation. The only real variable is how old you were the first time you tasted it, and who was standing next to you when you did. Now jump to a completely different kind of controversial egg, herring roe. Every spring in Sitka, Alaska, herring swarm the coastline to spawn, in numbers so massive the water turns milky white for miles. The Tlingit people have harvested herring eggs off hemlock branches and kelp here for thousands of years, and that spawning season is baked directly into their oral history, tied to why entire towns along this coast exist where they do. But the same egg, on the other side of the Pacific, is called kazunoko in Japan, a must-have dish on New Year's Eve, symbolizing fertility because a single mass holds an enormous number of eggs. Demand from Japan got so intense that by the mid-1990s, Alaska's commercial herring roe fishery was pulling in roughly $82 million a year in exports. But because commercial boats only wanted the egg-carrying females, the rest of each fish was often discarded, which is exactly why indigenous communities who'd harvested this sustainably for millennia started raising alarms about the herring population collapsing. Nobody's debating whether eating these eggs is disgusting. The only real question is who gets to take them, how much, and whether the method wrecks an entire coastal ecosystem in the process. In the United States, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 bans collecting wild bird eggs almost across the board. Few people know it has an exception added in 1997. After years of negotiation, Alaska Native communities are allowed to harvest eggs from certain seabirds, like thick-billed murreys, as long as the population stays healthy. That exception matters because in remote parts of Alaska, a gallon of milk can cost close to $10, and seabird eggs used to be a genuine lifeline. But as long as the population stays healthy, is a fragile condition. In recent years, people making the same seasonal trip to familiar cliffs have arrived to find a single egg, where thousands of birds used to nest. Climate change is quietly collapsing the exact legal exception this tradition depends on. And here's the priciest egg on the planet, sturgeon roe, or caviar. After decades of overfishing pushed sturgeon to the edge, international trade in wild caviar was placed under CITES control in the late 1990s, with a mandatory labeling system added in 2000. The problem is that system barely works. A 2023 study in the journal Current Biology ran genetic testing on caviar sold across 4 countries bordering the Danube and found nearly half of the products tested were illegal. Roughly a third traced back to poached wild sturgeon, and some samples contained no sturgeon DNA at all, just catfish or Nile perch passed off under a fake label. Wild caviar can sell for around $3,000 a pound, and since only females carry eggs, roughly 4 out of 5 illegally caught sturgeon are males, discarded with zero profit, just so poachers can find the one female worth taking. So caviar was never really about how good sturgeon eggs taste. It's about a species pushed to the brink because one body part became absurdly valuable. Looking at all 4 of these, none of it comes down to flavor. The century egg depends on whether you grew up in Hunan. Herring roe depends on which side of the fishery you're standing on. Seabird eggs depend on a 1997 legal amendment and a shifting climate. Caviar depends on a labeling system that keeps getting cheated. Chicken eggs didn't win because they're superior. They won because chickens are the one animal humans could farm at enormous scale without tripping over conservation law, international treaties, or a black market. A modern industrial hen lays around 300 eggs a year, an output no wild bird gets close to. No treaty needed, no sites listing, no smuggling required, just a coop and a bag of feed. If 10,000 years ago our ancestors had domesticated some prolific seabird instead, you'd probably be eating that bird's eggs for breakfast right now, and chicken eggs would be the regional delicacy in a video exactly like this one. The line between breakfast and forbidden was never drawn by biology, it was drawn by which treaties got signed, which market paid the most, and what you were handed to eat before you turned 3. Next time you pick up a chicken egg, consider this. If history had bent just slightly differently, you might be holding something else entirely.